The empty chair.
What if the greatest heartbreak in life isn't losing someone you love, but being forgotten by the people you sacrificed everything for? The empty chair is an emotional journey through love, family, sacrifice, loss, and hope. A story that will remind you to cherish those who matter before it's too late. Let's begin the journey before the silence. There are moments in life that seem so ordinary when they're happening. A cup of coffee shared at sunrise, a child's laughter echoing through the house, a quick goodbye before work, a promise to see each other again that evening. Most of us never realize those moments are becoming memories. Not until they're gone. This is the story of Ethan William Carter, a man whose life was built on love, tested by sacrifice, and forever changed by loss. If you were to drive through the quiet town of Cedar Grove, Ohio, you probably wouldn't notice anything unusual. It's the kind of place where neighbors wave from their porches, where children still ride bicycles down tree-lined streets, where everyone seems to know everyone else. Near the end of Maple Street stands a modest white house with blue shutters. Nothing about it looks extraordinary, except for one small ritual. Every single morning, before the sun rises, an elderly man walks onto the front porch, carrying 2 cups of freshly brewed black coffee. He sets 1 cup beside his own rocking chair. Then he gently places the 2nd cup on the small wooden table beside another chair, a chair that has remained empty for more than 10 years. He never skips a morning, not in the rain, not in the snow, not even when the winter wind bites through his old sweater. He simply sits there, watching the sun rise, waiting. The 2nd cup slowly loses its warmth. Steam fades into the cool morning air. Eventually, the coffee turns cold, just like it did yesterday, and the day before that, and every day for the last decade. To anyone passing by, it might seem like the habit of a lonely old man. But to Ethan, that chair has never been empty. It still belongs to Maggie, his wife, his best friend, his greatest blessing. Every sunrise reminds him of the mornings they spent together, laughing over coffee, planning their day, dreaming about the future. Back then, they believed life would always give them another tomorrow. They were wrong. Time has continued moving forward. But Ethan's heart never really left those mornings. It remains somewhere between yesterday and forever. People often say grief becomes easier with time. Perhaps that's true for some. For Ethan, grief didn't disappear. It simply became quieter. It settled into the empty rooms of his home, into the silence at the dinner table, into the untouched side of the bed, into the 2nd cup of coffee that nobody would ever drink again. But this story doesn't begin with loss. It begins with hope. Long before wrinkles covered Ethan's face, before gray replaced the dark hair Maggie loved to run her fingers through, before loneliness became his closest companion, he was simply a little boy who believed his parents knew everything, a little boy who laughed without worrying about tomorrow, a little boy who dreamed of building bridges that would stand for hundreds of years. He had no idea that the strongest bridges in life are never made of steel. They're built with love, with trust, with kindness. And unlike steel, they can break. This is the story of how those bridges were built, how some became stronger, and how others slowly fell apart. It's a story about childhood innocence, about first love, about becoming a husband, a father, and eventually, a man sitting alone beside an empty chair. So, before we continue, I want you to think about someone you love, someone you haven't spoken to in a while, someone you keep meaning to visit, but never quite find the time. Keep that person in your mind as we begin, because by the end of this journey, you may never look at another empty chair the same way again. Our story begins in the spring of 1967. The morning sun was just beginning to shine over Cedar Grove. Birds sang from the tall oak trees. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the neighborhood bakery. And inside a small white house on Maple Street, a 6-year-old boy named Ethan William Carter was about to begin another ordinary day. He had no way of knowing that these simple mornings would one day become the memories he'd treasure most. The town of Cedar Grove had changed over the years. New houses had replaced old farms. The corner grocery store where children once spent their allowance had become a modern convenience store. The old movie theater had closed its doors years ago. Even the giant oak tree across from Ethan's house had grown so wide that it now shaded half the street. Time had changed everything. Everything. Except Ethan's morning routine. At exactly 6 o'clock, he took a slow sip from his coffee and looked toward the empty rocking chair. For a brief moment, he smiled. "Good morning, Maggie," he whispered. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Some people would have called it strange. Others might have called it heartbreaking. But Ethan never cared what anyone thought, because love doesn't disappear simply because someone is gone. It learns how to survive in memories. A cool breeze drifted across the porch, carrying the scent of fresh grass and blooming flowers. It reminded him of another spring morning. A spring morning more than 50 years earlier. Back when life seemed endless. Back when every sunrise promised another adventure. Back when Maggie was still only a dream waiting somewhere in his future. Before the heartbreak. Before the lonely holidays. Before the silence. Back then, he was just a little boy. Inside the house, an old grandfather clock chimed softly. 6 o'clock. Ethan stood carefully, his knees protesting with every movement. Growing old had taught him many things. It taught him patience. It taught him gratitude. It taught him that memories often become our greatest treasures. But it had also taught him that nothing, not strength, money, or success, could stop time. He picked up both coffee cups. One was empty. The other was still almost full, just as it always was. As he reached for the door, his eyes drifted toward the framed photograph hanging beside it. The picture had faded with age. A younger Ethan stood smiling beside a beautiful woman with bright, joyful eyes. Maggie. She rested her head gently against his shoulder, while their young son stood between them, laughing at something outside the frame. It looked like the perfect family. And for a long time, it truly was. Ethan lightly brushed his fingers across the glass. "I miss you," he said softly. The words barely rose above a whisper. No one heard them, except perhaps the quiet house that had listened to those same words for more than 10 years. He carried the cups into the kitchen. The room was spotless. Everything sat exactly where Maggie had once liked it. Her favorite blue mug still rested on the shelf. Her handwritten recipe book remained beside the stove. Even the small ceramic rooster she bought at a county fair decades ago still watched over the kitchen from the windowsill. Friends had often told Ethan he should redecorate. Move on, start fresh. But how do you erase a lifetime of memories without feeling like you're erasing the person who created them? So he never changed a thing. The house had become more than a home. It had become a museum of love. Every object carried a story. Every room held a memory. Every corner whispered her name. As he washed the coffee cups, his thoughts drifted once again toward the past. Funny, he thought. When you're young, you dream about the future. When you're old, you live in yesterday. He smiled to himself. Then another memory appeared. A smell, fresh pancakes, the sound of someone humming in the kitchen, his father's familiar whistle, his little sister laughing upstairs because she couldn't find matching socks. And suddenly, the years melted away. The lonely old man disappeared. In his place stood a 6-year-old boy racing barefoot down a wooden staircase. The year was 1967, and everything was about to begin. The Boy Who Believed Forever. March 1967. The first rays of morning sunlight slipped through the lace curtains of the Carter family home, painting soft golden patterns across the polished wooden floor. Outside, Cedar Grove was just beginning to wake. A milk truck rumbled down Maple Street. Birds sang from the towering oak trees. Somewhere nearby, the sweet aroma of freshly baked bread drifted through the cool spring air. Inside the modest white house with blue shutters, 6-year-old Ethan William Carter opened his eyes. He didn't need an alarm clock. He never did. Every morning, he woke to the same comforting sounds that made the world feel safe. His father whistling in the kitchen, his mother humming an old country song while preparing breakfast, and somewhere upstairs, his little sister Emily talking to herself as she searched for her favorite socks. Ethan smiled. To him, those sounds weren't ordinary. They were home. He jumped out of bed, pulled on yesterday's jeans, and hurried toward the staircase. The old wooden steps creaked beneath his feet. "Mom!" he called, before he even reached the bottom. "I'm awake!" Helen Carter turned from the stove with a smile that could brighten any room. "I can see that." She laughed as Ethan wrapped his arms around her waist. "Good morning, sweetheart. What's for breakfast?" Helen pretended to think for a moment. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe broccoli and carrots." Ethan made the most dramatic face he could. "No!" She laughed. "I'm only teasing." She lifted the lid from a large skillet. Scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, golden toast, and pancakes waiting beneath a clean kitchen towel. Ethan's eyes lit up. "I knew you were joking." Before Helen could answer, the back door opened. Robert Carter stepped inside from the garage, wiping grease from his hands with an old shop towel. His work shirt carried the familiar scent of engine oil. He owned a small repair shop on the edge of town, and even though work kept him busy, he always found time to eat breakfast with his family. "There he is," Robert said with a grin. "My future engineer." Ethan stood a little taller. "I'm going to build the biggest bridge in America someday." Robert poured himself a cup of coffee. "The biggest?" "The strongest, too." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Then promise me one thing." "What?" "Make it strong enough to hold your old dad." Ethan laughed. "I will. And don't charge me a toll." "I'll let you cross for free." "Good answer." The two shared a smile. It was a simple conversation, one they would both remember for the rest of their lives. Just then, tiny footsteps thundered down the hallway. Emily burst into the kitchen wearing one bright red sock and one blue one. "I can't find the other red sock." Ethan pointed at her feet. "You already found two." "They don't match." "They're socks. They have personalities." Robert looked at Helen with a perfectly serious expression. "She's probably right." Helen burst into laughter. Even Ethan couldn't stop laughing. Emily folded her arms. "I don't know what's so funny." "You will someday," Robert said, smiling. Breakfast in the Carter home wasn't about the food. It was about the conversations. Robert always wanted to know everyone's plans for the day. Emily planned to paint butterflies in kindergarten. Helen was helping organize the church bake sale. Ethan couldn't wait to build a wooden birdhouse in class. Robert listened carefully to every word, as though each conversation mattered. Because to him, it did. When breakfast was over, Robert gently tapped his coffee mug against the table. "Family meeting." Emily sighed dramatically. "Already?" Robert smiled. "It'll only take a minute." He looked first at Ethan. "What do we always remember before leaving this house?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "Tell the truth." Robert nodded. "And?" Emily raised her hand proudly. "Be kind." "Very good." Robert looked at both of them. "And the last one?" The children thought for a moment. Then Ethan smiled. "Help people whenever you can." Robert's face softened. "Exactly." He looked around the table before speaking again. "You'll forget what toys you had. You'll forget what clothes you wore. You'll probably even forget most of your school grades. But people, they'll always remember how you made them feel." The room became quiet. Ethan didn't fully understand those words yet. He was only 6 years old. But without realizing it, those simple lessons were becoming the foundation of the man he would one day become. After breakfast, Helen straightened Ethan's collar before handing him his blue backpack. "Ready?" He nodded eagerly. Robert picked up the truck keys. "Let's go make today count." Ethan grabbed his father's hand as they stepped outside. The morning air was cool. The sidewalks were still damp from last night's rain. As father and son walked toward Maple Elementary School, Ethan looked up at the man beside him. "Dad?" "Yes, buddy. When I grow up." Robert smiled. "Yes? I hope I'm just like you." Robert didn't answer right away. Instead, he gently squeezed Ethan's small hand. Some compliments are too precious for words. And that one, he carried in his heart for the rest of his life. The walk to school, the walk to Maple Elementary School, took about 15 minutes. It wasn't a long journey, but for Ethan, it was the best part of every morning. He always walked beside his father. Sometimes they talked the entire way. Sometimes they simply enjoyed the quiet. The sidewalks were lined with towering maple trees, whose branches stretched over the road like welcoming arms. In spring, tiny green leaves danced in the breeze. In autumn, those same trees painted the streets with brilliant shades of orange and red. To Ethan, it felt like walking through a storybook. As they reached the end of Maple Street, Robert glanced down at his son. "So, what's today's big mission?" Ethan grinned. "We're building birdhouses." Robert nodded. "Sounds important." "It is. I'm making mine for Mom." Robert smiled. "I think she'll love it." They walked a few more steps before Robert spoke again. "And after school, I'm helping you wash the truck." "You remembered?" "I always remember." Robert chuckled. "I know you do." They reached a small crosswalk where an elderly crossing guard stood smiling at every child. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." "Morning, Frank." Frank tipped his cap toward Ethan. "Ready for another big day?" Ethan nodded proudly. "I'm building something today." Frank smiled. "Well then, build it with care." Those simple words stayed with Ethan as they continued walking. Soon, the red brick building of Maple Elementary came into view. Children ran across the playground laughing. Parents waved goodbye. Teachers stood outside greeting students by name. It wasn't a large school, but to 6-year-old Ethan, it felt like the biggest place in the world. As they reached the front gate, Robert stopped walking. He knelt until he was eye level with his son. "You know something?" "What?" "One day, you'll probably know more than I do." Ethan laughed. "I already know more dinosaurs." Robert laughed too. "I believe that." Then his smile became thoughtful. "But promise me something." "Okay. No matter how smart you become, never make someone feel small because they know less than you." Ethan looked confused. "Why would I do that?" "Because some people forget that being intelligent and being kind are two different things." He gently straightened Ethan's backpack. "The smartest person in the room isn't always the wisest." Ethan nodded. "I'll remember." Robert smiled. "I know you will." Before Ethan ran toward the school doors, Robert called after him. "One more thing." Ethan turned around. "What?" "I'm already proud of you." Ethan's face lit up. Those 5 words filled him with more confidence than anything else ever could. He waved one last time before disappearing into the school. Robert remained standing there for another moment, watching, smiling. Parents often think they're simply taking their children to school. What they don't realize is that they're watching childhood disappear, one ordinary morning at a time. Inside Maple Elementary, the hallways buzzed with excitement. Children hurried to their classrooms carrying colorful lunchboxes and oversized backpacks. The smell of freshly sharpened pencils mixed with the faint scent of floor polish. Everything felt familiar. Everything felt safe. Mrs. Linda Foster stood at the classroom door, greeting each student with a smile. "Good morning, Ethan." "Good morning, Mrs. Foster." "I hear today's birdhouse project is very important." Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "I'm making it for my mom." Mrs. Foster smiled warmly. "Then I think someone is going to receive a very special gift." Ethan hurried to his desk. Beside him sat his best friend, Michael Thompson. Michael leaned over and whispered, "I'm terrible at building things." Ethan looked at him. "You've never tried." "I built a paper airplane once." "What happened?" "It flew backwards." Ethan couldn't help laughing. "Maybe birds fly backwards where you live." Michael laughed too. Within moments, the two boys were smiling so hard that Mrs. Foster had to remind them the class was about to begin. Neither of them knew it yet, but this friendship would become one of the most important parts of Ethan's childhood. Some friendships begin with a handshake. Others begin with laughter. The strongest ones begin with both. The birdhouse Mrs. Foster clapped her hands once, and the cheerful chatter in the classroom slowly faded. "All right, everyone," she said with a warm smile. "Today we're going to build something very special." The children's eyes lit up. On a table near the blackboard sat small pieces of wood, tiny nails, glue, paintbrushes, and little cans of colorful paint. "A birdhouse," someone shouted excitedly. Mrs. Foster laughed. "That's right. But this isn't just about building a birdhouse." She looked around the room, making sure every child was paying attention. "It's about building something with patience, something made with love, and something you're proud to give to another person." Ethan smiled. He already knew exactly who his birdhouse was for. His mom. Mrs. Foster handed each student a small bundle of wooden pieces. "Remember," she said, "this isn't a race. Take your time. The strongest things are almost never built in a hurry." The classroom quickly filled with the sounds of little hammers tapping, children giggling, and teachers walking from desk to desk offering encouragement. Michael frowned at the pile of wood in front of him. "I think mine is upside down." Ethan looked over. "I don't think it has a top yet." Michael scratched his head. "That explains a lot." The boys laughed. Across the room, Tommy Jenkins accidentally squeezed far too much glue onto his project. Sticky white glue spilled across his desk. "Oh no." Mrs. Foster walked over. Instead of getting upset, she smiled. "Looks like your birdhouse wanted an extra hug." The classroom erupted with laughter. Even Tommy couldn't stop smiling. Ethan carefully measured every piece before pressing it together. His small hands moved slowly. Every corner had to line up. Every nail had to be straight. He remembered something his father always said: "Measure twice, build once." Even though Robert had never seen today's assignment, Ethan could almost hear his voice guiding him. When he gently tapped the final nail into place, he leaned back and smiled. It wasn't perfect. One side leaned just a little. The roof wasn't completely straight, but to Ethan, it was beautiful. Mrs. Foster stopped beside his desk. "Finished already?" Ethan nodded. "It's for my mom." She picked it up carefully, turning it in her hands. "You built this yourself?" "Yes, ma'am." She smiled. "You should be proud." "I am." Then she looked him in the eyes. "But do you know what I like most about it?" Ethan shook his head. "You didn't give up when it became difficult." He hadn't even realized she'd been watching. Sometimes the greatest compliments aren't about talent. They're about character. Before lunch, Mrs. Foster placed every birdhouse on the windowsill. No two looked the same. Some leaned to one side. Some had crooked roofs. Some were covered with fingerprints of drying glue. But each one had been built with care. To 6-year-old children, they looked like masterpieces. As when the lunch bell rang, Ethan and Michael raced outside. The playground buzzed with laughter. Children swung from monkey bars. Others chased each other across the grass. Some gathered around the kickball field. Michael pointed toward the swings. Race you! Before Ethan could answer, Michael was already running. That's cheating! Ethan shouted as he chased after him. The boys laughed so loudly that several younger students turned to watch. For the next 30 minutes, nothing else mattered. Not homework, not chores, not tomorrow. Just laughter, running,